The 7-Day Stalker, the Rustle-Up, the Lockstep Lurker, or, as it's more commonly known, the Follows Me. Maybe you've not heard of it, but it's an old woodsman legend. A creature, or even a man of some sort in some stories, that lives in the forests of Scotland. The description was always a bit vague, I thought. Long shaggy hair, 2 large gleaming eyes, crawls on all fours. Like a dog, but also not, is a well-used illustration. Like I said, vague. Legend has it, once it spots you, it'll stalk you for 7 days, all the while trying to get closer without you noticing. If you can make it a week, you're safe. If not, it eats you. Time was I would swear down that people who saw this thing were completely off their faces at the time, though that time has since passed. I'm an avid outdoorsman and regularly escape to nature for solo camping trips. I decided to take some of my holiday time and spend a week backpacking. So last Friday, I travelled out to a favourite spot of mine. Quiet, remote, perfect. I was all set up in my tent, belly full of beans, and a nice long weekend to look forward to. Doesn't take me too long to drift off to sleep, but despite my lifetime worth of camping, I tend to rest much lighter outdoors than I do at home. That first night in the woods, I woke to a rustling outside of my tent. This far north there's nothing to worry about but the locals. I thought it might be a deer and was tempted to poke my head outside, see if I could get a glimpse of it. I couldn't be sure, but at some point, I thought I could see the walls of my tent indent, as if whatever was outside was feeling the surface. Part of me wanted to reach out and touch it, but a rustle from my sleeping bag must have startled it. The noises stopped, but I never really did hear it leave. I got back to sleep pretty quickly after that. Saturday morning, I emerged from my tent nice and early, had some food, and decided before I left to take a look around and see if I could find some tracks. I certainly did, but none like any I'd seen before. Long feet with 4 wide toe marks at the top of each foot. The markings themselves were scattered, as if whatever made them had been moving around my tent for some time. I still had a long walk ahead and didn't want to spend too much time thinking about it, so I figured I'd do some research when I got home. Can't be wasting my phone battery on endless Google searches out here. Soon enough, my stuff was packed and I was on my way. The Highlands are stunning, just miles of untouched wilderness. Saturday went well. No problems, just me, nature, and the odd fellow hiker here and there. Mid-afternoon I found a suitable place to spend the night, made some dinner, and got ready for a good night's rest. Again I was woken up in the wee hours by the sound of movement outside my tent. The same rustling from the night before, from what I could tell. Again I lay still in my sleeping bag, just listening to it. And again came the indents in the fabric of my tent. I watched, trying my best not to set it off. Then whack! The gentle pressing against the tent turned into what seemed like hits. I didn't know how to react. This had never happened before. I struck out at the side and shouted, "Clear off!" That seemed to do the trick. But then after an hour or so, there it is again, only lighter this time, soft hits against the fabric. I was tired and annoyed by this point, so once more I yelled and struck back. I did hear some more movement, but it was so quiet and faded quickly. There were no more disturbances during that night. other than the small sense of unease that lingered throughout. Sunday had me a bit unhappy. A restless night will do that to you. But it was made all the worse when I was packing up my tent and saw those same tracks from the day before. I mean, they were identical. This time I took a photo. Figured I'd save that for the later research I was going to do. I could not figure out what kind of animal this was. Was it following me? Or was it a different one with similar behavior towards tents? Answers would have to wait. I had a holiday to reclaim. Despite being a little tired, I made good ground and mostly had a good day. Admittedly, I took the odd moment to stop and check my surroundings. I had become slightly paranoid that some animal was tracking me for one reason or another. With this in mind, I chose to set up camp earlier, this time in a clearing halfway up a hill, so I could keep an eye out on the way I came, and whether something, or someone, was following. Hours went by and there was nothing, not even another hiker, or at least as far as I knew. I stayed up later than usual. It was a nice night, albeit very cold. I wanted to see if I could spot whatever was coming by my tent, assuming it was still close by. More hours passed, and with my energy levels depleted, I opted to go inside and sleep. This time, I wasn't awoken by any noises or disturbances with the tent, but rather my own bladder. Nature was calling, and I couldn't sleep through this one. I put on my head torch and stepped out into the cold night air. I was halfway through doing my business when I realized I hadn't heard anything from my recent visitor, and for a moment, I felt reassured that it was just a strange couple of occurrences. Until I turned to walk back to my tent and noticed that the grass was disturbed around my site. There was no way I had been that active around the camp. This was like a crop circle of crushed grass. I looked around, scanning the area, but couldn't see anything. I looked up to the peak of the hill, and for a second I thought I saw something move. It was so dark though. I tried to brush it off and eventually went back into my tent, although I kept my torch on for a while. Monday, and my groggy, unhappy attitude had turned into one of suspicious concern. It seemed so silly, but I was actually concerned I was being stalked. Part of me wanted to believe it was a stray dog, but I just couldn't shake the feeling that wasn't the case. I really didn't want what little time I have off worrying over nothing. I was a good day and a half's walk from my car now, and going back just seemed stupid. So I kept going, although I didn't get anywhere near as far as I wanted to that day. Too tired and distracted. I opted for a more open area this time. Perhaps a bit too close to the footpath, but I didn't want to be anywhere with something to hide behind, if there was indeed someone or something doing that. As I lay in my tent, I decided to use some of my precious phone battery and tried to research the footprint I found. As soon as I saw that name, chills ran across my entire body. The follows me. No, there was no way it could be real. It's got to be made up, and I'm just acting mad. The more I read, the greater my worry. I read about how it'll test you, see if it can take you quietly, and the longer it goes without eating, the more aggressive it becomes. I lay there, eyes glued to my phone. Then I heard it. Movement outside. It was quiet and fast, moving erratically around my tent, like it was investigating, looking for a way inside. I didn't make a sound. That was until I heard the zip to my tent start to open. I got up and yelled bloody murder. Beyond my yelling, I could just about hear it retreating back from my tent. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, though I couldn't hear anything like the movement from earlier. It wasn't until I saw Tuesday morning's daylight start to break through did I hazard leaving the relative safety of my tent. It was still a little dark out, but I had my torch handy and scanned the surrounding area. I didn't see anything. That was enough. I didn't care whether the follows me was real or not. I was done, and it was time to go home. Only, I was far from my car, and I knew I wouldn't make it back before night came. That whole day I was a mess. I felt like I was being watched and couldn't move fast enough. I came across a couple of other hikers at one point, but I couldn't speak to them long. I thought about telling them what I'd gone through, but part of me felt they'd just think I was mad. They told me they'd not seen anyone coming ahead of me or behind them, which meant I would most likely be travelling the rest of the way alone, or at least without any company I'd have liked. I pressed on, occasionally looking back or around me, just to see if I could spot anything. It felt like time was against me, as dusk was quickly looming over, and pretty soon I was genuinely scared. My car was still too far to reach in the dark, and I was quick-footing my way along the footpath, torch in hand. I had two choices: risk the tent, or try to cover more distance by walking through the night. I chose the latter. Trudging through the dark, I was completely on edge, which was only made worse as I reached a long stretch of woods. The trees surrounded me, and part of me felt so stupid I'd not just set up in a field and taken my chances. But there was no way I was going back. I don't remember what it was that set me off, but I shot around and shone my torch through the trees. I kept changing direction. It could be anywhere, and I envisioned it being right in my face the moment I turned. Then I saw it, briefly. I was shining my torch to the left, and a shadow sped right. It was so quick, I thought it wasn't real, but I didn't want to take the chance. I tried to follow its direction, shining my lights across the forest. Just as my light moved away from a tree, I saw a glint of a reflection. I held the light still in a brief panic. It was still there. A flick of my wrist brought the light back to the tree, and there were two large gleaming eyes staring at me. We were both still. It was completely dark, and it quickly shot out and behind another tree. Again and again it was circling me, and I think it was getting closer. I lost it and started yelling, screaming out wildly. I spun around trying to seem as big and scary as possible. Suddenly, everything was still. I couldn't see it. I had to keep moving. Daylight was hours away. The night dragged on, and while I thought I saw it a few more times, I made it to dawn. Wednesday broke through the trees and shortly led me into another field. I was so tired, hungry. Truly, I was running on empty. I needed rest, even if it was just a quick nap. I decided to set up my tent and get a quick sleep. Half asleep, I set my alarm for a couple of hours. When I woke up, I tried to check my phone, but the screen stayed black. It had ran out of power. I darted out of my tent. I must have slept for a good 6 hours, lost a lot of daylight, and now I was completely without a way to contact anyone. I threw everything into my pack and hoofed it. No more stopping, no more talking to other hikers, I just kept moving. Even as the sun was setting, I walked, I was so close now, I knew I could make it to my car. Through fields and forest, I made my way. Finally, it comes into view. My car. I chucked my stuff in the back and practically threw myself inside. Oh, it was pure bliss. I'd never felt so safe and reassured in my life. I just sat there for a while. Doors locked, obviously, phone plugged into charge. I closed my eyes and once again nodded off. I woke up in darkness. Quickly I checked my phone. 8:27 p.m. Despite the safety of my car, I still had a bad feeling. I would not spend the night here. I knew I couldn't make it home, not this tired. So I decided to drive a ways down the road, find a lay-by and just kip there until I felt secure enough to make it home. That's exactly what I did. Drove slowly, parked up, reclined my seat, used my coat to keep warm, and dozed off. Clang. I wish it was a bad dream. I was immediately alert, eyes wide open. Silence. Clang. Silence. Clang. I knew what was happening. It had found me. It was trying to open my car. I didn't move. I didn't want to see it again. Scratching scored down the glass of my window. Then a series of short, sharp creaking noises on the door itself. It wanted in, but I was not letting that happen. I jumped up, got the driver's seat sorted, turned on the engine and got out of there. I drove straight home, threw myself through my front door and there I stayed. Thursday. I'd made it. Sometime after a long rest, I went to my car to retrieve my pack and supplies. It was only when the sun was up I could see my car clearly. A couple of thin scrape marks on my window and 4 indents at the lower side of my driver's side door. I felt a bit sick when I realized it had been trying to pry open the door and had been making quick work of it. I couldn't tell you how much of a relief it was to be home. I was miles from that place, that thing, and surrounded by light and people. There was no way it was gonna get me. I'd escaped. The only bad news, I was completely out of food in the house. Originally planning to stop by the shop on my way home to restock. It was getting late, but with all the street lights and buildings around, I felt safe. I drove there and back with no problems. Got plenty of food and something nice to wash it down with. Parked up, walked up to my front door, which was ajar. I had locked up, I know I had. I stepped back. There was no way. This had to be some sick coincidence. Then I spotted it. In the dirt. That long footprint. It had followed me. I jumped back into my car, turned it on, but as I was about to go, I looked over into my living room window, and in the reflection of the streetlights, I saw its eyes gleaming at me through the darkness of the house. I've never sped out of that estate so fast. I drove and kept driving. I'll drive all day and night if I have to. It's going to be Friday. One more day, that's all I need. Friday came. I drove and kept on driving. Thought about stopping by somewhere, a friend's or family, but I couldn't. What if it targeted them as well? No, I couldn't put them in harm's way like that. Friday passed with me stopping every now and then to grab something from my shopping bags, which were still in the car, or a coffee at whatever petrol station I came by, just to keep me awake. Made it deep into the countryside, Far from my home, from that thing. Or at least that's what I'm hoping. My car broke down about 30 minutes ago. I called the mechanic, who told me it would take over an hour to get all the way out here, to the sticks. My doors are locked, I'm watching out as well as I can, but it's so dark. I wanted to post this. Just write something down in case anything happens. Don't want anyone thinking I just up and disappeared. Maybe I should get out. Maybe I should run for it. I just have to keep moving. Wherever I go, it's there. It follows me.